17 days? That's all it took for America's new Attorney General to make a promise that would haunt her for months. Pam Bondi sat in front of the camera, looked directly at millions of viewers, and said the words everyone had been waiting to hear. The Epstein client list was sitting on her desk right now, not coming soon, not being reviewed, right there, ready to be released. For years, people had wondered who else was in Jeffrey Epstein's network, which powerful names were being protected, and why justice seemed to stop at his cell door. And now finally, someone in power was saying they had the answers. The moment felt massive. Survivors might finally get validation. The public might finally see accountability. And America might finally prove that no one stands above the law. But what came next wasn't justice. It wasn't transparency. It was something far more twisted.
The release of Epstein-related files on February 27th, including preparing binders for conservative influencers and commentators. However, the files released were largely already publicly available. There was nothing new. After intense blowback, Attorney General Bondi went back to Fox News, the mothership, and claimed that a whistleblower, quote, assured her there were more files, and that, quote, New York, Southern District of New York, was sitting on thousands of pages of documents. And she promised on Fox, and I quote, we will get everything, and the country will see, quote, the full Epstein files. These are quotes from Attorney General Bondi voluntarily appearing on Fox News to explain the situation. For the next 4 months, the Department of Justice and the FBI were silent. What happened during that period? Well, we received information that Attorney General Bondi pressured the FBI to assign, now get this, approximately 1,000 agents in its Information Management Division and hundreds of additional agents from the New York field office to work 24-hour shifts to review and produce more documents on Epstein on an arbitrarily short deadline. These officials were told to, quote, flag any records in which President Trump was mentioned. But after this flurry of activity using tens of thousands of personnel hours in March, it took DOJ and FBI 3 additional months to produce no new documents, but rather an unsigned memorandum on July 7th finding that, quote, this systemic review revealed no incriminating client list. Naturally, after all of the public promises Attorney General Bondi has made, the public is really suspicious of her finding. This suspicion has been exacerbated by public reporting that FBI Director Patel and FBI Deputy Director Bongino disagree with Attorney General Bondi's handling of this matter. Public mistrust has been fed by other claims in the July 7th memorandum. This memorandum included links to surveillance video footage from outside Epstein's cell in the hours leading up to his death. The July 7th memorandum describes one of the videos released as full, raw footage, yet experts who've analyzed it concluded the video was likely modified. The Trump administration has essentially created a new controversy rather than solving one. President Trump is not helping matters at all. Despite his administration continuing making promises about the transparency on Jeffrey Epstein and claims about the existence of records that have not been produced, he is currently telling the country the president is saying this is all, quote, a scam, close quote. Yesterday, President Trump posted on his personal social media site, and I quote, my past supporters have bought into this BS hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned their lesson, and they probably never will. That's from the president's personal social media. This is the president talking about his own constituents who are concerned about claims his own campaign surrogates and administration have continually raised. President Trump and Attorney General Bondi are directly responsible for all this confusion and mistrust, and they need to be fully transparent, and they should release all of the documents for the public to review as quickly as possible.
The anticipation built for weeks. Conservative influencers were briefed. Media outlets prepared their coverage. February 27th was circled on calendars across the country as the day everything would change. And then the files dropped. People rushed to download them, expecting bombshells, expecting names, expecting something that would justify all the hype. Instead, they got a stack of documents they'd already seen. Journalists recognized pages from years-old court filings. Researchers found materials that had been public since 2019. There was nothing new, nothing hidden, nothing that lived up to the promise of revelation. It was like being told you're getting a treasure map and receiving a photocopy of an old newspaper instead. The frustration was immediate and intense. Conservative commentators who'd been primed to cover the release found themselves with nothing to report. The public felt betrayed. Social media exploded with questions. If this was what sat on Bondi's desk, what exactly had she been promising? The administration had created a massive media event around recycled information, and now they had to answer for it. But instead of owning the mistake, instead of clarifying what went wrong, Bondi did what any seasoned political operator does when caught in an uncomfortable position. She went back on television and made an even bigger promise. Fox News became the stage for round 2. Bondi appeared on camera again, this time with a new story. A whistleblower had come forward, she claimed. This person had assured her that there were thousands more pages. The Southern District of New York was supposedly sitting on them, hiding them from the public. And Bondi made a new vow, crystal clear and impossible to misinterpret. We will get everything, and the country will see the full Epstein files. Those words weren't vague. They weren't qualified with maybes or possiblies. They were a direct promise to the American people. And this time, she said, it would be different. This time, the truth would come out. People wanted to believe her. They wanted to think that maybe the first release was just a mistake, a miscommunication, and that the real files were still coming. So they waited and waited. And as weeks turned into months, that waiting turned into something else entirely. Behind the scenes, something strange was happening inside the FBI. Reports started filtering out through sources close to the Bureau. Bondi hadn't just requested a review of Epstein files. She'd allegedly ordered a massive operation that pulled nearly 1,000 agents away from their regular assignments. These weren't just any agents. They were from the Information Management Division, people who handle classified materials and sensitive records. And hundreds more were reportedly brought in from the New York field office, all of them put on 24-hour shifts. All of them told to comb through Epstein case files with one very specific instruction that raised eyebrows across the intelligence community. Flag any records where President Trump was mentioned, not to find evidence of wrongdoing, not to uncover new leads about trafficking networks, just to identify mentions of one specific name. Career agents who'd spent years tracking terrorists and organized crime syndicates were suddenly doing what felt like political opposition research. The confusion inside the Bureau was palpable. This wasn't how investigations worked. This wasn't how you pursue justice for victims. This was something else entirely. Behind the scenes, something strange was happening inside the FBI. Reports started filtering out through sources close to the Bureau. Bondi hadn't just requested a review of Epstein files. She'd allegedly ordered a massive operation that pulled nearly 1,000 agents away from their regular assignments. These weren't just any agents. They were from the Information Management Division, people who handle classified materials and sensitive records. And hundreds more were reportedly brought in from the New York field office. All of them put on 24-hour shifts. All of them told to comb through Epstein case files with one very specific instruction that raised eyebrows across the intelligence community. Flag any records where President Trump was mentioned, not to find evidence of wrongdoing, not to uncover new leads about trafficking networks, just to identify mentions of one specific name. Career agents who'd spent years tracking terrorists and organized crime syndicates were suddenly doing what felt like political opposition research. The confusion inside the Bureau was palpable. This wasn't how investigations worked. This wasn't how you pursue justice for victims. This was something else entirely. March became a blur of activity. Thousands of personnel hours were burned through. Agents worked around the clock, sifting through documents, cross-referencing names, building databases of mentions and references. The operation consumed resources that could have been used for active national security threats. And for what? That became the question that haunted everyone involved. Because after all that work, after all those hours and all that manpower, the results were stunning in their emptiness. April passed with no updates. May brought only silence. June came and went without a word. The public that had been promised transparency was left in the dark, wondering what happened to all those files Bondi swore existed. And then, on July 7th, the answer finally came. Not with a press conference, not with testimony before Congress, but with a quiet release of an unsigned memorandum that seemed designed to close the case without actually answering anything. The memo was brief and bureaucratic. It stated that a systematic review had been conducted. It claimed that this review revealed no incriminating client list, and that was supposed to be the end of it. No signatures, no accountability. Just a document that essentially said, "We looked and found nothing, trust us." But the public wasn't buying it anymore. If there was truly nothing there, why did it take 4 months after that March operation? Why mobilize 1,000 FBI agents for a review that yielded 0 results? Why make such bold promises on national television if the files never existed in the first place? The memo didn't answer these questions. It created new ones. And some of those questions became deeply disturbing when people started examining what the memo actually included. Attached to the document were links to surveillance footage, video from the cameras outside Jeffrey Epstein's cell in the hours before his death. This was supposed to be the definitive record, the proof that would settle years of speculation about what really happened that night. The memo described one video as full raw footage, implying it was unedited and complete. But when experts actually analyzed the files, they noticed something off. The timestamps didn't flow naturally. There were brief gaps, moments where the continuity broke, cuts that shouldn't exist in truly raw footage. Technical analysts who work with surveillance systems started raising red flags. The video appeared to have been modified after the fact, not during recording, but during archiving or processing. Someone had touched these files. And if that's true, if the so-called definitive evidence had been altered, then every assumption about Epstein's final hours gets called into question. Who modified the footage? When did it happen? And most importantly, what are they hiding? The administration seemed to hope the memo would end the conversation, that people would accept the conclusion and move on. But the opposite happened. Public mistrust exploded, and then President Trump himself made everything infinitely worse. Instead of trying to calm concerns or provide additional transparency, he went on the attack, against his own supporters. The same people who had believed his campaign's promises about exposing elite corruption, the same voters who demanded accountability from day one. Trump took to social media and called the whole thing a scam. He said his supporters had bought into BS. He mocked them for believing, saying they hadn't learned their lesson and probably never would. It was a stunning moment of contempt for the very people who'd put him in office. And it revealed something crucial about how the administration viewed this entire situation. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about victims. It was about narrative control. And when that control slipped, when people started asking the wrong questions, the response was to ridicule them into silence. Inside the FBI, the situation was reportedly reaching a breaking point. Sources suggested that Director Patel and Deputy Director Bonino were deeply uncomfortable with how Bondi had handled everything. Some called it political theater. Others used harsher terms. Whether these reports were completely accurate or somewhat exaggerated, the damage was done. The public perception was set. America's top law enforcement agencies were no longer speaking with one voice. There was infighting, disagreement, and a fundamental breakdown in the unified front that's supposed to exist when pursuing justice. The credibility that institutions rely on was eroding in real time. And through it all, Pam Bondi remained largely silent. The woman who'd confidently declared the list was on her desk had seemingly vanished from the conversation. No follow-up interviews. No additional clarifications. Just that unsigned memo and a trail of broken promises. Senator Durbin decided someone needed to put all of this on the record. In a hearing that cut through months of confusion and spin, he did something simple but devastating. He read Bondi's own words back to the public, every promise, every assurance, every confident declaration she'd made on live television. Sitting on my desk right now. The country will see the full Epstein files. We will get everything. Durbin didn't need to editorialize. He didn't need to add commentary or speculation. The words themselves told the entire story. A promise made with absolute certainty, followed by months of silence, followed by a memo claiming there was nothing to find. The gap between what was said and what was delivered couldn't have been wider. And Durbin's calm, methodical presentation made it impossible to dismiss or spin away. This wasn't partisan attacks. This wasn't conspiracy theories. This was simply holding someone accountable for their own statements. The hearing exposed something that goes far beyond one case or one broken promise. It revealed a pattern that Americans have seen too many times. Promise transparency, then deliver bureaucracy. Pledge accountability, then hide behind unsigned memos. Commit to justice, then ridicule the people demanding it. This pattern doesn't happen by accident. It's a deliberate strategy for managing public expectations while protecting powerful interests. And the Epstein case became a perfect example of how it works. Create a spectacle around the promise of revelation. Let anticipation build. Then release something that technically fulfills the promise without actually delivering substance. When people complain, accuse them of being unreasonable or buying into conspiracy theories. Wait for the news cycle to move on and count on public fatigue to do what active cover-ups never could, make people stop asking questions. But here's what makes this moment different. The victims of Epstein's network are still waiting. They've been waiting for years, watching powerful people avoid consequences while their own trauma gets dismissed or minimized. When Bondi made that first promise, some of them allowed themselves to hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this administration actually meant it. And then they watched the same pattern play out again. The same deflection, the same protection of the powerful. The same message that their pain doesn't lead anywhere meaningful. That's the real cost of broken promises like this. It's not just political embarrassment. It's telling survivors that the system still isn't for them, that justice is still just a word used on television when it's politically convenient. The question now isn't whether Pam Bondi broke her promise. That's already been established. The question is what happens next. Does this become another scandal that fades into the background? Another disappointment that people eventually stop talking about? Or does the public demand the accountability that was promised? because that's how cover-ups survive in the modern era. Not through brute force or obvious censorship, but through attrition. They count on people getting tired, getting distracted, getting overwhelmed by the next crisis. They count on outrage, fading into resignation. And they count on the fact that most people, even when they're angry, eventually move on. That's the real test here. Not whether new documents suddenly appear, but whether Americans let this story die quietly. Every unanswered question in this case keeps it alive. Where did those thousands of pages Bondi mentioned actually go? Why? Was the FBI operation focused on flagging Trump's name instead of finding new victims or identifying new perpetrators? Who modified that surveillance footage, and what are they hiding? Why did it take 4 months to produce a memo that says nothing? These questions don't go away just because the administration stops talking about them. They linger, accumulating into a weight that eventually demands answers. But only if people keep asking. Only if the pressure doesn't fade. Only if victims aren't forgotten again in the rush to move on to the next story. The Epstein case was supposed to be the moment America proved its justice system works for everyone, not just the connected and powerful. Instead, it's become another example of how truth gets managed, massaged, and buried under layers of bureaucratic procedure. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just what the evidence shows. Bold promises followed by recycled documents. More promises followed by silence. A massive FBI operation followed by a memo claiming nothing exists. Surveillance footage that experts say has been tampered with. A president mocking his own supporters for believing him. And through it all, not a single new name held accountable. Not a single victim given the justice they were promised. Just the same old pattern dressed up in new language about transparency and draining swamps. This story matters because it's bigger than Epstein, bigger than Bondi, bigger than any single scandal. It's about whether institutions can be trusted when they make promises. It's about whether power actually faces consequences in America or just manages to protect itself through better PR. It's about whether the public has enough memory and enough determination to hold leaders accountable for what they say. And right now, the answer to those questions is being written in real time, based on whether people let this fade away or keep demanding the truth they were promised. The files might be missing, but the promise isn't. It's on video. It's in the record. And it's not going anywhere unless people choose to forget.